Welcome back to Dialogue Dimensions, everybody. Ready for round 2 in our fight against Excusitis.
I'm ready. We left off last time talking about that sneaky little voice in our heads. The one that gives us all those reasons to not do something.
Right, like it almost convinces us that procrastinating is the logical choice. But seriously, diving back into Christopher Walker's Defeating Excusitis, what really struck you this time around?
Honestly, the way Walker reframes making excuses, it's not just laziness or weakness, right?
Yeah, he calls it a disease, which is a pretty strong image.
Exactly, and he talks about it like a mental muscle, The more we use it, the stronger it gets.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Because it means we're not doomed to be excuse makers forever. We can actually retrain our brains to fight back.
Exactly. But first, we gotta recognize when that excuse muscle is flexing, Catch ourselves in the act.
So what about those excuses that sound almost reasonable, though? Like, I don't have time, or I'm not feeling well. We've all been there.
Oh, absolutely. Those are like the gateway drug to full-blown excusitis.
Haha, gateway excuses. I like that.
You start with one little, I'll do it later, and suddenly, bam,
Yeah,
you're a master excuse maker with a to-do list a mile long.
and a whole lot of guilt, probably.
No doubt. But it's not about beating ourselves up. It's about catching those excuses early before they snowball into something bigger.
So who's most likely to fall into this trap? Walker talks about some personality types, but I don't want it to sound like we're labeling people.
Right, of course not. It's more about recognizing tendencies in ourselves, and understanding how those tendencies might lead to, well, more excuses.
Okay, so what tendencies are we talking about?
Well, Walker starts with people who struggle with low self-confidence.
Which makes sense. If you don't believe in yourself, it's easy to find reasons not to try in the first place.
Exactly. And those excuses become a way to protect ourselves, right? Like a shield against disappointment.
But the problem is, that shield also blocks out all the good stuff. The growth, the achievement, the feeling of actually accomplishing something.
It's a trade-off we don't even realize we're making, Giving up potential for the sake of comfort.
Okay, what's another personality type that's prone to excusitis?
Oh, the chronic procrastinators. I think we all know a few of those.
Uh-huh. Or maybe we are those few. I'm definitely guilty of procrastination sometimes.
Oh, me too, absolutely. It's practically a universal human experience. But for some people, it becomes a real issue.
Yeah, it goes beyond just putting things off. It's like a whole way of life built around avoiding stuff.
And excuses are their best friend, right? Oh, I work better under pressure, or I'll get to it when I'm inspired.
Classic procrastination lines. But here's the thing. I think procrastination often comes from deeper stuff, like anxiety or fear of failure.
Absolutely. Those excuses are just a way of masking those underlying anxieties.
Okay, so low self-confidence and chronic procrastinators. Who else is on Walker's list?
Well, next up are the perfectionists, always waiting for the stars to align before taking action.
Oh, I know those types. It's not quite right yet. I need to do more research, and on and on and on.
And the irony is, by striving for perfection, they often end up achieving very little.
Because they're so paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake that they never actually do anything.
Exactly. They're masters of the what-if game. What if it's not good enough? What if people don't like it?
It's like their vocabulary is filled with not yets and maybes, always hesitating, second-guessing.
And missing out on all the possibilities.
All right, who's the last group that's susceptible to excusitis?
I think this one's pretty relatable to a lot of people. It's the fearful individuals.
Makes sense. Fear is such a powerful emotion, and it can so easily lead us down the path of least resistance.
Exactly. And excusitis is right there, offering up a seemingly rational explanation for why it's okay to stay stuck.
It's too risky, it whispers. What if you fail?
It's like that feeling when you're about to do something scary, like a big presentation or asking someone out on a date.
Oh, totally. Your heart's racing, your palms are sweating, and suddenly all those excuses sound really appealing. Maybe I'm not ready, or what if they say no? Those are the classic fear-driven excuses.
And they're so insidious because they disguise themselves as logic and reason. It's not your fault, they say. It's just circumstances.
But underneath all that logic is just plain old fear, holding us back from taking a chance.
Exactly. And it's robbing us of those incredible experiences that come from facing our fears and pushing past our perceived limitations.
Okay, so we've talked about some personality types that might be more prone to excusitis, but what are the deeper reasons, the root causes that make people fall prey to it in the first place? Walker identifies a few key drivers, And I think understanding these can help us recognize those patterns in our own lives.
Totally. And the first one is, you guessed it, fear of failure.
Which we've already touched on a bit, but it's worth diving deeper into.
Right.
I mean, it's understandable, right? Nobody enjoys failing.
Of course not. But here's the thing. When we let that fear dictate our actions, we miss out on so much.
Like all the growth and learning that comes from trying and, yes, sometimes failing.
Exactly. Failure is an essential part of the learning process. It's how we figure out what works, what doesn't, and how to get better.
It's like that famous quote, "I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed."
Exactly. If we never try, we never give ourselves the chance to learn, to grow, and to ultimately achieve those things that we're capable of. It's like we're so focused on avoiding that sting of failure that we forget that the greatest growth often comes from those moments when we stumble, pick ourselves up, and learn from our mistakes. And that's a shame because those experiences, those are what shape us, build resilience, and ultimately lead us to success.
Like trading long-term fulfillment for short-term comfort.
Exactly. We're holding ourselves back from experiencing the richness and depth of a life that's fully lived because we're afraid of what might happen if we take the reins and truly own our choices and their outcomes.
Okay, we've talked about the different personality types that might be more prone to excusitis and the underlying drivers that contribute to it. But let's get into the nitty-gritty of how this actually plays out in our lives. Walker highlights a few common scenarios where excusitis tends to strike, and I think these will be super relatable to our listeners because we've all been there at some point. So let's start with facing challenges.
Whenever we're confronted with a task that requires effort, persistence, or a willingness to step outside of our comfort zone, excusitis is right there whispering in our ear, "It's too hard, you're not good enough, what's the point?" It's like it's trying to protect us from potential discomfort or failure, but in reality, it's just holding us back from experiencing the incredible growth and satisfaction that comes from overcoming those challenges.
It's like that resistance we feel when we're starting a new workout routine or tackling a complex project at work. That initial urge to give up, to find reasons why we can't do it, to go back to what feels familiar and comfortable. But it's in those moments of pushing through the resistance that we discover our true strength and resilience.
Absolutely. And it's not just about achieving the goal itself. It's about the transformation that happens within us when we choose courage over comfort. We learn that we're capable of more than we thought, that we can handle discomfort, and that the satisfaction of overcoming those challenges is far greater than the temporary ease of giving in to our excuses.
I think back to a time when I was facing a major career change, and all those excusitis voices were screaming at me, "What if you fail? What if you're not good enough? What if you regret this decision?" But I pushed through those fears, took the leap, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made. It wasn't easy, but the rewards were immeasurable, and I learned so much about myself in the process.
That's such a powerful example of how confronting those challenges head-on, even when it feels scary or uncomfortable, can lead to incredible growth and open up new doors of opportunity. But facing challenges isn't the only time when excusitis loves to rear its ugly head. It also tends to show up during uncertain times, which, let's be honest, feels like a pretty constant state of being these days.
That's so relatable. When the world feels chaotic and unpredictable, it's natural to want to retreat, to find reasons to stay put, to cling to those familiar routines and habits, because they offer a sense of control in an otherwise uncontrollable environment. But how does that play into the cycle of excusitis?
When things feel uncertain, our excusitis voices become louder, more persuasive. They whisper, "It's not the right time. Wait until things settle down. Don't rock the boat." And while those excuses might provide temporary comfort, they also prevent us from adapting and evolving. It's like trying to navigate a storm by staying anchored to the shore. You might feel safer in the moment, but you're also missing the opportunity to ride the waves and reach new destinations.
So it's like we're letting fear of the unknown paralyze us into inaction, even if that inaction ultimately leads to stagnation and a sense of being stuck.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that often the greatest growth happens outside of our comfort zone during those times of uncertainty and change. When we're forced to adapt, to learn new skills, to think creatively, and to find solutions, we tap into a wellspring of resilience and resourcefulness that we never knew we had.
It's like that saying, necessity is the mother of invention. When we're faced with challenges, we're forced to innovate, to grow, and to become more than we were before. But let's move on to another scenario where excusitis tends to show up when fear takes over. We've talked about fear of failure, but there are so many other fears that can hold us back, right?
Fear is a complex emotion, and it can manifest in so many different ways. We might fear rejection, judgment, success, change, the unknown, the list goes on and on. And when fear takes the driver's seat, Excusitis is right there, offering up a seemingly rational explanation for why it's okay to stay frozen in place. It whispers, "See, it's not your fault. You have a perfectly valid reason for not doing this. It's just too risky, too scary, too much." But the thing about fear is that it often distorts our perception, magnifies the risks, and minimizes our ability to cope.
It's like looking through a pair of glasses that make everything appear bigger and scarier than it actually is.
Yeah.
We become so fixated on those potential threats that we lose sight of our own strengths and resources.
That's such a great analogy. And the key to overcoming those fear-driven excuses is to recognize when fear is driving the bus and to challenge those distorted perceptions. Ask yourself, is this fear based on reality, or am I letting my imagination run wild? What's the worst that could happen? And even if that worst-case scenario were to come true, would I be able to handle it?
It's about separating the actual risks from the imagined ones, and then assessing whether those risks are worth taking in light of the potential rewards. And often, when we really examine those fears, we realize that they're not as insurmountable as they seem. We might even discover that the potential rewards far outweigh the risks. But let's talk about one more scenario where Excusitis loves to strike when accountability is absent. We've already touched on the importance of internal accountability, but what about those situations where there's no external pressure to perform? How do we stay motivated and avoid falling into the trap of excuse-making when no one's holding us accountable but ourselves?
This is where that internal accountability muscle becomes crucial. When there's no external deadline, no boss breathing down our neck, no one to disappoint but ourselves, it's easy to let those excuses slide. We tell ourselves, "Oh, I'll get to it eventually," or "It's not a big deal if I skip it just this once." But those little slips can quickly turn into a pattern of procrastination and inaction.
So how do we cultivate that internal accountability, even when there's no external pressure? What are some strategies for staying motivated and on track when we're the only ones holding the reins?
That's a great question, and it's something that we'll delve into in more detail in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore some practical tips and techniques for building that internal accountability muscle, setting effective goals, and staying motivated even when those excusitis voices are trying to lure us back into our comfort zones.
That's a perfect cliffhanger. I can't wait to unpack those strategies in the next episode. But for now, we want to leave our listeners with this thought. Take a moment to reflect on those common scenarios where excusitis tends to show up in your own life.
What challenges have you been avoiding? What dreams have you been putting off because of fear or uncertainty?
What excuses have you been telling yourself that are preventing you from stepping into your full potential?
Recognizing those patterns is the first step to breaking free from the grip of excusitis and creating a life that's aligned with your true desires.
We'll see you back here soon for part 3 of our deep dive into defeating excusitis, where we'll explore practical strategies for overcoming those excuses and achieving your goals.
Until then, keep those minds curious and those conversations flowing.
And we're back, wrapping things up with part 3 of our Excusitis deep dive. I feel like we've really unpacked a lot from Christopher Walker's book.
We have. From those sneaky excuses that sound almost reasonable to the personality types who might be more susceptible.
And of course, those underlying fears and insecurities that fuel the whole excusitis cycle.
Right. It's not just about willpower or laziness. It's way deeper than that.
Exactly. But knowledge is power, right? So now that we've explored the problem, what are some practical ways to actually defeat excusitis?
Well, Walker gives us a whole toolkit of strategies, but I think it all starts with self-awareness.
We've talked about recognizing those excuse phrases, the next weeks and maybes, but self-awareness is more than just catching those words, right?
Totally. It's about understanding the why behind those excuses. Like, what's the real reason I'm putting this off? What am I afraid of?
Okay, so it's not just saying, oops, there's that later excuse again.
Yeah.
It's asking, okay, but W-blind, why am I saying that? What's going on under the surface?
Exactly. It's like shining a light on those hidden corners of our minds, bringing those subconscious patterns into the open where we can actually deal with them.
So we've identified those underlying beliefs, those fears, those insecurities. What's next? How do we actually start to dismantle those patterns?
Well, that's where the real work begins, and it's not always easy. But one of the most powerful tools Walker gives us is challenging those negative beliefs.
Don't just accept them as truth, right?
Right. Question them, put them on trial. Ask yourself, is this really true? Or is it just a story I'm telling myself?
So instead of thinking, I'm not creative enough to start that business,
We might challenge that with, hold on, I've come up with some pretty creative solutions at work. Maybe I do have that spark.
exactly. It's about reframing those limiting beliefs, shifting our internal dialogue from self-doubt to self-belief. And it's not about pretending those fears don't exist.
It's about acknowledging them, addressing them, and then choosing to focus on what's possible instead of what's holding us back.
That's so powerful. Okay, but it's not all about mindset, right? Walker also talks about setting clear, specific goals.
You got it. Our goals are like our compass, our roadmap to success. But vague goals lead to vague actions or no action at all.
It's like saying, I want to be healthier, but not having a plan for how to actually do that. It's just a wish floating around in our heads.
Right. It's like setting out on a road trip with no destination. You might enjoy the ride, but you're not going to get very far.
So instead of I want to be healthier, maybe it's I'm going to cook 3 healthy meals at home this week, or I'll sign up for that yoga class I've been thinking about.
Exactly. Make it measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. There's a framework called SMART goals that can really help with this.
And once you have that clear goal, break it down into smaller steps. Those baby steps make the big goal feel less overwhelming.
It's like climbing a mountain, right? You don't just teleport to the top, you take it one step at a time.
Okay, clear goals, baby steps. What else helps us kick excusitis to the curb?
Walker talks about cultivating a growth mindset, and I love this concept.
Me too. It's all about seeing challenges as opportunities to learn and grow, not as reasons to give up.
Exactly. People with a growth mindset believe they can improve their abilities through hard work, dedication, and learning from their mistakes.
So instead of seeing failure as a sign that they're not good enough, they see it as a chance to get better.
Exactly. They embrace feedback, seek out new knowledge, and they're always pushing themselves outside their comfort zone.
There's like that quote from Carol Dweck, the growth mindset guru. The passion for stretching yourself and sticking to it, even when it's not going well, that's the hallmark of the growth mindset.
That's a good one. Okay, now let's talk about accountability. We've touched on internal accountability, holding ourselves to our own standards, but external accountability can be a game changer too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Having someone to share your goals with, someone to check in with, it can make a world of difference in staying motivated.
It's like having a cheerleader in your corner, someone who believes in you and wants to see you succeed.
Okay, so how do we get more of that external accountability in our lives?
So many ways. Find an accountability partner, like a friend or colleague who has similar goals. Join a group, like a mastermind group or a fitness class, where you can connect with others who are working towards something similar, or even hire a coach, someone to provide guidance and support along the way.
So many great options. And then, of course, there's the power of self-compassion.
Yes, this is so important.
We all make mistakes. We all have setbacks. It's part of being human. But how does self-compassion fit into defeating excusitis?
When we fall into that excuse-making trap, it's easy to beat ourselves up about it, right? Ugh, I'm so lazy, or I'll never get this right. But that kind of negative self-talk is just fuel for the excusitis fire.
Yeah, it just reinforces those feelings of inadequacy and makes it even harder to get back on track.
Exactly. Self-compassion is about acknowledging those excuses, understanding why we made them, and then moving on with grace and kindness towards ourselves.
It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress. And this journey of personal growth isn't about perfection, it's about progress.
I love that. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And sometimes we need to give ourselves a little pep talk along the way.
So true. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. What's the big takeaway for our listeners when it comes to defeating excusitis?
I think the key is recognizing that it's not a one-time fix, it's an ongoing process. It's about being aware of those self-sabotaging patterns, challenging those limiting beliefs, and setting clear goals for ourselves.
It's about cultivating a growth mindset, finding ways to stay accountable, and most importantly, being kind to ourselves along the way.
It's about showing up for ourselves day after day, even when it feels tough.
It's about believing in our own potential and choosing to create a life that truly reflects who we want to be.
So to wrap up, I want to ask our listeners, what excuses are you holding on to? What dreams are you putting off?
It's time to ditch those excuses and step into your full potential. The only limits you have are the ones you set for yourself.
So go out there and make it happen.
That's a wrap on another deep dive here at Dialogue Dimensions. We hope you found this exploration of defeating excusitis insightful and, most importantly, empowering. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. We love hearing your thoughts.
And until next time, keep those minds curious and those conversations flowing.